Once again, good evening. And thank you to our worship team who's through the Easter season pulling double duty, right? Because only a few days from now they'll play again for us as we celebrate Easter. And so we sit in a weird place, don't we? Having lived at a time that is after the events occurred that we're reflecting on, we know where the story goes. And if you've heard me talk much, if you spent much time with me, you know one of my things that I often do when I read Scripture is I talk about trying to put myself in the position of those who experience this for the first time. The disciples who gathered around the table, if you came to our at the table experiences yesterday, one of them, they sat around the table and they broke bread together and Jesus said, "I'm going to die, but it's a good thing." And the events unfolded, and the disciples scattered, fearful, confused, anxious for what this means. I mean, I've given up my life for this man, Jesus. What does this mean for me now? I sold everything I had. I left my father and my job and my home to travel with this man across the land, and now he kept saying he was with the Father, and now he's dead, dying. And if he did all those things that I was there when he did, I was there when he fed the 5,000. When that little boy came with the fish and the bread, I was there when we had 12 baskets full afterwards. Why did he not get off that cross? I was there when Jesus got the news that his friend Lazarus had died, and he wept. And then he went to Lazarus' house and he said, "Lazarus, get up," and Lazarus came back to life. I was there. Why didn't he get off that cross? He had the power and the ability. And if I'm one of the disciples sitting in this moment for the first time, I have to think, man, what is going on? Is everything that I've thought, everything that I've experienced, a sham? And maybe somewhere in your life of faith, you've questioned, is it a sham? Have I not been authentic? Maybe it's because somebody in your life, someone you respected, fell. They messed up. They did something that they shouldn't have done. And you begin to question, is this all a sham? And I think for the disciples, perhaps that's exactly where they find themselves. So as I said, as we move into this time together, there's some elements that might be a little bit unfamiliar to you in time of worship together, but I want us to just press into this for a second. If you can all hopefully read the text on the screen, what it says up there is, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And what I want to do is I want to do just a brief response litany. And what that is I will read some scripture, and then together we will say these words in unison. And we'll do this a couple times back and forth as I read from portions of the book of Psalms. But as we begin, what I want you to do is I want you to just place these words in your heart. As we step into our time together, this plea and this offering to God. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. So may we say it together, and then I'll open up with our reading. So, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Psalm 31, verse 2. Listen closely to me. Rescue me quickly. Be a rock of refuge for me, a mountain fortress to save me. Verse 6, I hate those who are devoted to worthless idols, but I trust in the Lord. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Psalm 31, verse 12, I am forgotten, gone from memory like a dead person, like broken pottery. I have heard the gossip of many. Terror is on every side. When they conspired against me, they plotted to take my life. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Verse 15, the course of my life is in your power. Rescue me from the power of my enemies and from my persecutors. Make your face shine on your servant. Save me by your faithful love. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Verse 17, Lord, do not let me be disgraced when I call on you. Let the wicked be disgraced. Let them be quiet in Sheol. Verse 25. Be strong and let your heart be courageous, all you who put your hope in the Lord. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. John chapter 18, verse 28. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They did not enter the headquarters themselves, otherwise they would be defiled and unable to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and he said, "What charge do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you." Pilate told them, "You take him and judge him according to your law." "It's not legal for us to put anyone to death," the Jews declared. They said this so that Jesus' words might be fulfilled, indicating what kind of death he was going to die. Then Pilate went back into the headquarters, summoned Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you asking this on your own, or have others told you about me?" "I'm not a Jew, am I?" Pilate replied. "Your own nation and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" "My kingdom is not of this world," said Jesus. "If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." "You are a king then?" Pilate asked. "You say that I'm a king," Jesus replied. "I was born for this, and I have come into this world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." "What is truth?" said Pilate. After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no grounds for charging him. You have custom that I release one prisoner to you at the Passover. So, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" And they shouted back, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a revolutionary. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers also twisted together a crown of thorns. They put it on his head and clothed him in a purple robe. And they kept coming up to him and saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and were slapping his face. Pilate went outside again and said to them, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know I find no grounds for charging him." Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the temple servants saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate responded, "Take him and crucify him yourselves, since I find no grounds for charging him." "We have a law," the Jews replied to him, "and according to that law, he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God." And when Pilate heard this statement, he was more afraid than ever. He went back into the headquarters and he asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus did not give him an answer. So Pilate said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" "You would have no authority over me at all," Jesus answered him, "if it hadn't been given to you from above. This is why the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." From that moment, Pilate kept trying to release him, but the Jews shouted, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend, and anyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside. He sat down on the judge's seat in a place called the Stone Pavement. It was the preparation day for the Passover, and it was about noon. Then he told the Jews, "Here is your king." And they shouted, "Take him away! Take him away! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, Should I crucify your king? We have no king but Caesar." The chief priests answered. Then he handed him over to be crucified. Then they took Jesus away. Carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and 2 others with him, one on either side with Jesus in the middle. Pilate also had a sign made and put it on the cross. It said, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read the sign because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Don't write the King of the Jews, but that he said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate replied, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided them into 4 parts, a part for each soldier. They also took the tunic, which was seamless, woven in one piece from the top. So they said to one another, "Let's not tear it, but cast lots for it, to see who gets it." This happened so that the scriptures might be fulfilled that says, "They divided my clothes among themselves and cast lots for my clothing." This is what the soldiers did. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his home. After this, when Jesus knew that everything was now finished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, he said, "I'm thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was sitting there. So they fixed a sponge full of sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it up to his mouth. When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." Then bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. Since it was preparation day, the Jews did not want the bodies to remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a special day. They requested that Pilate have the men's legs broken and that their bodies be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man and of the other one who had been crucified with him. When they came to Jesus, they did not break his legs, since they saw that he was already dead. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this has testified, so that you also may believe. His testimony is true, and he knows he is telling the truth. For these things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. Also, another scripture says they will look at the one they pierced. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might remove Jesus' body. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and he took his body away. Nicodemus, who had previously come to him at night, also came bringing a mixture of about 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. They took Jesus' body, wrapped it in linen cloths with the fragrant spices according to the burial customs of the Jews. And there was a garden in the place where he was crucified. A new tomb was in the garden. No one had yet been placed in it. They placed Jesus there because of the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby. I don't know when's the last time you sat and read that or listened to it. Maybe that's a practice you have every year. It's something you do as you listen to the story, as we often do for the Christmas story, but there's something far more uncomfortable about this story than the Christmas story, isn't there? I mean, the Christmas story, we sit around maybe a nice fireplace and we start talking and sharing stories about joy and laughter and fun, and we're thinking about all the bright lights and the presents, and some of this is the fabrication stuff. You know, this is the conglomeration of the corporateness of Christmas, but we're thinking about all these fun things. And even in reading the story, there's sad elements in the Christmas story too. Sure, Mary and Joseph couldn't find a place to stay, so they had to go and use the innkeeper's barn in the back to give birth to Jesus. But there's so much excitement There's so much joy in this story. And in this story, it's uncomfortable. It makes you maybe even a little squeamish to think about it, to really sit and contemplate in this. Oops. You know, the picture's missing there. That's okay. In the Gospel of Matthew, in his recording of the crucifixion, he notes in chapter 27, verses 51 and 53, that the curtain in the temple was torn as Jesus died. The curtain in the temple was torn as Jesus died. There was a loud earthquake, and the curtain was ripped from the top to the bottom. This curtain separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place inside the temple. This was significant because in the temple there were three things. There was the lampstand, there was the table of showbread, and there was the incense altar. And in the temple, for the Jewish people, all of these served a purpose. They had a reason that they were in the temple, and the priests would go inside the temple into the holy place, and they would do their daily rituals with each one of these things because they all served a purpose. The lampstand symbolized knowledge and guidance through Scripture, that it might light the path, that it might help us understand how it is we are to live, as instruction, as guidance. The table of showbread memorialized with 12 loaves for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. That God had called these people, that God had grown these people, that God had used these people, and each of them had a role and a place in this story. And the incense altar, which symbolized prayer. Prayer being the closest we could be to God. The veil stood right in front of it, blocking the holy place from the Holy of Holies, which had the Ark of the Covenant in it. This picture, if you can kind of see it a little bit, is a side profile picture of what the temple might have sort of looked like. The larger portion, as you can kind of tell, make out a little bit, there's a man in there, the priest is doing his daily duties, and there's the three elements in there. Beyond that, blocked by a veil, was the Ark of the Covenant, which was where God's presence rested. When you read the Old Testament, you read the stories of Exodus and the stories of David and the kings and all these things. You hear all these stories about the Ark and God's presence and where God's presence rested with the people. And as they carried God's presence from place to place. And so when they finally landed in the Promised Land, they built the temple and they said, well, God's house needs to be filled with his presence. And so they put it in the innermost room that not everybody had access to. In fact, only one man once a year had access into that room. The high priest would go only once a year. And the weight was so significant, the ritual cleansing process was so significant that they couldn't afford to go more frequently. And the fear that the man might be struck dead when he walked into there if he was not worthy was so imminent that they would tie a rope around the priest's leg lest he drop dead so they could drag his body out, because they didn't want to have to wait another full year to go in there and retrieve a dead, rotting body. This is how significant this is. And here again, for us, it's hard for us to really sit in this and understand it fully, because we're living ahead of it. We're living afterwards. But we need to try to understand the world that existed before Jesus died. If we really want to understand what Jesus did, we have to understand how bad it really was. The people had no access to God. The people couldn't even hope to get into the presence of God. It was veiled off. And it wasn't just because God was like, I don't want to have anything to do with you, but it was because God's holiness was so holy that those who were unworthy couldn't stand in his presence. And who could be worthy? Then comes the man named Jesus, the Son of God, God himself. The presence of God manifested in human form. Just try to imagine for a second growing up, thinking that God's presence was in a building somewhere, behind a closed veil, that only the most pious and good men could ever hope to go see. Women, you're excluded. Sorry, you can't be a high priest. Imagine that that's the life you've grown up in. And now here comes a man, Jesus. And when he's met with the woman who's caught in the middle of the act of adultery, he crouches down next to her. When he's met with the woman at the well, he sits down and converses with her. When he meets the lepers and the cripples and the poor and the blind and the sick and dying, he touches them. He holds them. He sees them. He calls them. Heals them. God's presence manifested. And so it's no mistake the significance of this event. When Jesus dies, it is a Good Friday. Because when Jesus dies, it allows a cataclysmic moment to happen in the life of our faith. No longer need we be separated from God, because Jesus has broken the curse that none of us could have broken. None of us would have ever been worthy to break the curse. No great champion of the faith could have ever been worthy. And yet Jesus did it and gave us access. No longer separated. Now we can go directly to God. Now we can go directly to him with our concerns, with our hurts, with our needs. And I want you to understand too that the veil tearing from the top to the bottom is no small feat in and of itself. The veil was the thickness of a man's hand, and it was embroidered with figures of cherubim in it, and it was over 60 feet long and 30 feet wide. It took 300 priests to move it, manipulate it, to get it up there. The veil was also an image of death because, as I said, the presence of God stood behind it, and everyone knew they couldn't go behind it. So when the veil tore, when the veil was ripped, it was as if, just think about it, it ripped from the top to the bottom. Scripture says, Matthew says, records that there was an earthquake, and you might be inclined to think that it ripped from the bottom to the top. The earth shook and split apart and ripped that way, but it says that the veil was torn from the top to the bottom. And it's as if God's own hand came down like a piece of paper and ripped it. See, the veil tearing is not somebody figuring out how to get past it and get behind it and sneak around it. It's a removal of its necessity entirely, so that we might have access, so that we might be redeemed, so that we might be reconciled. Clearly, it says that no priest is needed to beg for the forgiveness of the people to God anymore. But instead, Jesus' blood has given us access to the Almighty Father. If we just accept the gift of salvation, if you accept that this is for you, that Jesus did it for you, there's now no separation from the realms of heaven and earth either. I mean, Jesus began to muddy it when he came to earth. The presence of God was walking around this place. I mean, can you just Think about that for a second. The world we live in, the places you go and the people you interact with, I'm not calling anybody out by name, but sometimes those places, those people seem to be the furthest thing from holy or from heaven that you could ever imagine. And yet where God walked, it's holy. Where God intervened, it's sacred. Where God moved, there's reconciliation. And so Jesus comes, dies on the cross so that the work might continue, so that we might get to be a part of the work as he invites us in through the power of the Spirit to be instruments of this work, making it on earth as it is in heaven. We're no longer separated. You are no longer separated. Regardless of how you feel, regardless of how good of a person you think you are, how holy of a person you think you are, how many times you messed up, or how many times you messed up back then and you think, I can only get so far. You don't realize how bad of a person I was. I did a lot of bad things. I have this conversation a lot with soldiers. In fact, one of the conversations I have with many soldiers is they're curious about the faith. They're genuine in their kind of want and desire to seek Jesus more fully, but they struggle to reconcile what it is they're called to do as soldiers with the message of love and forgiveness of Jesus. They struggle with that. There is a tension there. And I've had many tell me in the past before, now when I get out, like I'll be able to kind of commit myself to this Jesus thing. When I get done with the military, when I can put that behind me, I can really invest in this Jesus thing. And I think of many of the veterans in my own life, some that are holy, God-fearing, wonderful men and women. And for many of them, not all of them, many of them will tell the story. Man, when I was in the service, I wasn't the same person. There was a difference there. And for some of us, we look at our past and we think, it disqualifies me from getting so far. I can only get to this point because all this stuff is so much that I can't get over that threshold. Listen to me. There is no longer separation. You need not be separated from God. You can be fully embraced, fully reconciled, fully made holy through the power of the Spirit. It takes us surrendering, and it takes our desire of Jesus. I'm going to ask the worship team to come back up again for us, and we're going to sing one more song together. And it's all about that. I desire Jesus. I want Jesus. If I have nothing else in this life but Jesus, then I have it all. So I encourage you, as they come and they get prepared, to stand and sing together with heart turned over to the Jesus we desire. Let's sing together. Hello, my name is Matthew Kirkpatrick, and I am the lead pastor of Northside Church of the Nazarene here in Zanesville, Ohio. And we are so thankful that we had the opportunity to connect with you today through these digital means. Whether you watched our sermon live streamed at the same time as we were gathered in the church building on Sunday morning, or you've been watching it on demand at a different time in a different location, we're thankful for these digital abilities to connect with people all around the globe, but mostly to connect with you. We hope that the message has been insightful and encouraging for your life. We hope that you're walking away with something valuable and you felt like your time was worthwhile watching this, and it wasn't just consuming a video on the internet. We also would like to extend an invitation to you. If you find yourself in the Zanesville area on a Sunday morning and you would like to gather with a group of believers to worship God, we meet every single Sunday at 10:30 a.m. at 739 Francis Street in Zanesville, Ohio. There's space for you and your whole family, so bring them all and come worship the King together. For more information on other things that are going on in our church life, go to znsnaz.org. That's znsnaz.org. From there, you can see all of our weekly activities, discipleship programs, and the life of the church that is going on here in Zanesville. We hope to connect with you in person soon. God bless and have a great day.